women don't understand. It's a freedom that you want. It's the same freedom that gay men have when they go and they pick up a stranger someplace. They know it's dangerous. They know they could end up beaten up or killed, okay, but they find it hot. If you want freedom, if you want equality, okay, then you have to start behaving like a man. Okay? So what we did is we gave freedom to these young women for several generations, but my generation had been raised in a far more resilient and robust culture. Okay, we had the strength, okay, to know what we wanted and to fight for what we wanted. These young women have been raised in this terribly protected ways. Right? So I think in some strange, fashion, that all these demands for intrusion from these, Stalinist committees, sexual, investigating dates and so on, it's a way to reinstitute, okay, the rules that my generation threw out the window. So I think these young women are desperate. Not only that, but I have spoken out very strongly in a piece I wrote for Time magazine, as in my most recent book, that raising the drinking age in this country, okay, from 18 to 21, okay, has had a direct result, okay, in these disasters of binge drinking fraternity parties. Because to let college students, the way we could, go out as freshmen, have a beer, sit in a protected adult environment, learn how to discourse with the opposite sex in a safe environment, right, and so on. And now today, okay, because of the stupid rule that young people can't even buy a drink, okay, in a bar until they're 21, we have these fraternity parties that are like it's the caveman era. Well, of course, in this modern age, this disadvantages men. Okay, men want to hook up, men want to have sex. Women don't understand what men want. So, women are like put out because they're hoping that maybe the man will continue to be interested in them. Okay, the man just wants experience. Okay, the hormones drive toward. To me, I've theorized, okay, that the sex drive in men is intertwined with hunt and pursuit. Okay.
Yes.
And so on. I feel absolutely this is what women don't understand. Okay. And if women understood what I understand from my transgender perspective, all right, these women on the streets. Okay. I'm obviously Madonna admirer, and I support pornography and prostitution. So I don't want what I'm about to say to seem conservative. It isn't. Okay. What I'm saying is the women on the street, young women, okay, who are jogging, okay, with no bra on, okay, short shorts, and have earbuds in their ears, okay, just jogging along like this. I said these women do not understand the nature of the human mind. They do not understand the nature of psychosis, okay, and this intertwining that I'm talking about, okay, of the hunt and pursuit thing, okay. They're triggering a hunt thing, just what you have talked about in terms of the zebra herd, okay. They are triggering the hunt, okay, impulse, okay, in psychotic men, okay. To have there goes a very appetizing and totally oblivious animal, okay, bouncing along here, okay. So, and we're in a period now where psychosis is not understood at all, okay. Young women have had no exposure to movies like Psycho, okay, the kind of the rapist, serial murderer thing, and so on. The kind of strange dynamic that has to do with the assault on the mother imago, in the mind of the psychotic. So I think there's an incredible naivete. These young women are emerging and going to college, and in this like incredible Dionysian environment of orgiastic sexual experience in fraternity houses. They're completely unprepared for it, right? And so you're getting all this outrage. So feminist rhetoric has gotten more and more extreme in its portrayal of men as evil. But in fact, okay, what we have is a chaos. It's a chaos in the sexual realm. The girls have not been told anything real, in terms of biological substratum to sexual activity.
And there's full of lies about what constitutes consent too.
Exactly.
And it's become something that's essentially portrayed linguistically as a sequence of progressive contracts, which I think, I've thought for a while that we're living in the delusional fantasy of a naive 13-year-old girl. That's basically sums up our culture. And I look at all these sexual rules that permeate the academia, and I think two things. The first thing I think is, I know because I was an alcohol researcher for a long time, and that 50% of violent crimes are directly attributable to alcohol. So if you're murdered, there's about a 50% chance that you're drunk, and about a 50% chance that the person who kills you is drunk. And alcohol is the only drug that we know that actually amplifies aggression. It does that in laboratory situations. Plus, it's a great disinhibitor, right? So what alcohol does is it doesn't make you oblivious to the future consequences of your action. Because if you ask someone who's drunk about the consequences of something stupid, they can tell you what the consequences are. But it makes you not care. And it does that because it's technically an anxiolytic, like barbiturates or like benzodiazepines, and it also has an activating property for many people who drink. So it's a stimulant and an anxiolytic at the same time, and a very potent. It's very potent for both of them. And you know, we put young people together and douse them in alcohol, right, at the binge drinking level, and then, which also interferes with memory consolidation, which of course makes things much more complex. And then we're surprised when there are sexual misadventures, and you know, and then it's also attributed almost purely to the predatory element that's part and parcel of masculinity, but a tremendous amount of that is also naivety and stupidity. Yes. You know, because we expect, like 18-year-old guys, especially the ones that haven't been successful with girls, which is like 85% of them, because the successful men are a very small percentage of men. The 85% who haven't been successful with men or with women, they don't know what the hell they're doing at all, right? And part of the reason they're getting drunk is to garner up enough courage to actually make an advance. Yeah. You know, and because I think another thing that women don't understand, especially with regards to young men, is just exactly how petrifying attractive woman who's of, say, somewhat higher status actually is to a young guy. And there's lots of guys that write me constantly, and people that I've worked with, that are so terrified of women they can't even talk to them. Right. It's very, very common.
Well, you know, I take a very firm position, which is that I want college administrations to stay totally out of the social lives of the students. Yeah. Right? If a crime is committed, it should be reported to the police. I've been writing that for 25 years now. Right? But it's not the business of any college administration to take any notice, okay, of what the students say to each other, as well as do with each other. Okay? I want it to totally stop. It is fascism of the worst kind.
I agree. Well, I think it's fascism of the worst kind because it's a new kind of fascism. Mm-hmm. You know, it's partly generated by legislation. So like the Title IX memo that was written in 2011, yes. I recently got a copy of that goddamn thing. That was one polluting bit of legislation. That memo basically told universities that unless they set up a parallel court system, they were going to be denied federal funding. Unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable.
Incredible. And the leftists are supporting this.
I know.
And this shows there is no authentic campus leftism. I'm sorry, it's a fraud. Okay, I mean, the faculty should be fighting the administrations on this.
Yeah,
fighting that federal regulation.
How fast could you even hope for things to change? Look at what's happened to the situation with women since 1970. That's changed so fast that people can't even keep up. It's not obvious, by the way, either, that it's been particularly good for women. Now, you could make a case that it was good for society, maybe. It's a tough one, eh? Because the birth rate has plummeted. And so, you know, maybe you don't care about that. Maybe you think there's too many people on the planet already, whatever. But, you know, it isn't that easy to figure out when something is working properly. One of the things we seem to know, is that to the degree that rights are extended to women, economic prosperity follows. So you can see worldwide that the societies that have extended the rights to women most extensively are also the societies that seem to be flourishing economically. And there does seem to be a causal relationship. But women have paid a big price for that. So what's happened in part is, first of all, for say, women who are middle class or lower, their lives have essentially fallen apart because marriage is now restricted to the rich, which is also something to think about for those of you who think marriage is an oppressive patriarchal institution. It's like, okay, then why are only the rich people getting married? They're oppressing themselves? I don't think so. And so the women who are in the lower socioeconomic stratas are suffering madly, and so are their children. And they have terrible jobs most of the time, like jobs in retail where, you know, they're called in every day for the next day. They don't have a schedule that's set out ahead of them. They get paid very badly. They've got kids to take care of. And so they have no free time. It makes them really easy targets for useless predatory males. And it's really hard on the kids. And that's like 40% of the female population, something like that. And you guys, you know, well, I don't know about all of you, but you're in university. You're part of the privileged cognitive elite, you know. So these sorts of things don't really touch you the same way they touch other people. And so women are much unhappier if you look at national polls than they were, say, in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And I think that's partly because freedom and happiness, those are not the same thing. They're not even close. And I see young women all the time struggling to figure out what to do with their lives because they have no idea how to have a job/career and a family. So, and there's no answer to that. It's a really difficult problem. And there's all sorts of ideas. Like, I did a lot of consulting for law firms for a long time, about a decade, and I had a lot of clients who were extremely high-functioning female lawyers, younger ones, trying to figure out how to balance their career with their desire to have a life. And, you hear all the time about women being denied access to positions of power, and that's the consequence of prejudice and oppression. It's like, yeah, everything is caused by the same thing first. Right, you have got one causal principle. Wonderful. Now you're a philosopher. You can figure out everything with it. It's like the law firms cannot keep their women in their 30s. They cannot keep them, the big law firms. They all leave. Why? Because the women hit 30, they're brilliant, conscientious, intelligent. They were deadly in high school, deadly in university. They nailed law school. They whipped through their articling. They made partner by the time they were 30. It was like they're in a rocket to the top position. What do they find when they get there? 80-hour work weeks, right? Because that's one of the things you want to think about. You think that the people who run things are sitting at home smoking big cigars and like telling their minions what to do. It's like that's like the 1920s millionaire that's on the cover of the Monopoly game. That's no sociological analysis. I know lots of people like that, and they work all the time, from the second they wake up till the second they go to sleep. And they don't just casually work. Because I know some of you go to the library for 6 hours and you say, well, I studied in the library for 6 hours. Like, no, you didn't. You studied for half an hour. And you had coffee and you looked through Facebook and, you went home and you said, well, I studied for 6 hours and you're happy about it. But bloody well you didn't. Partly because you can't. I can only read for about 3.5 hours till I'm done. And I'm pretty good at it. So these people who are running things, there's corrupt people, obviously, but the vast majority of them, first, are self-made, and second, they're so bloody efficient and smart, you cannot believe it. And they work 80 hours a week. And most of them happen to be men. And why is that? Because there are a small number of insane men who will do nothing but work 80 hours a week. And no matter where you put them, if you put them in the middle of a forest with an axe, all they would do is run around chopping down trees. So the issue isn't, why aren't there more women in positions of power? It's, why are there any men insane enough ever to occupy those positions? Because we also know, and the data on this is very clear, what's the relationship between money and well-being? Once you have enough money to keep the bill collectors from your door, so once you have enough money to stave off misery, which is sort of lower middle class, something like that in our society, maybe a little lower than that, extra money does not help you. It does not improve your life. So why bother with it? Well, that's what the women in the law firms think. It's like most of them, by the time they're in their 30s, are married. Almost all of them are married to men who make as much money or more than they do, because that's what women go for cross-culturally. 4 to 5 years older, equal or higher in the socioeconomic status. So their husbands already make $350,000 a year. It's like they think, well, I don't need much more money. The men use money to keep track of the competition, by the way, because all the male lawyers that I talk to are usually real hard-ass guys, really low in agreeableness, really high in conscientiousness, like conservative types, low in openness as well. And they want to win. And the reason they care about their damn bonus at the end of the year isn't even so much because of the money, it's because they got a much bigger bonus than the other son of a bitch sitting beside them, and they're happy about that. So there's a real brass knuckles competition that drives these sorts of things. But we get things backwards so often in psychology and in sociology. It's not why there aren't more women in positions of power. It's, why do any men want those positions? You just have no idea the amount of responsibility that comes along with that. You just imagine for a minute trying to run a billion-dollar corporation. You can't even bloody well balance your checkbook, and there's dust bunnies underneath your bed. How in the world would you ever run a billion-dollar corporation? Those things are complicated. And you have enemies, and they're trying to take you out all the time. You look at Apple and Samsung, man, they're just torturing each other in the courts nonstop. If you're running a big corporation, you'll be handling 200 or 300 lawsuits at a time. And that's just nothing compared to the complexity of what you actually have to do. Stay on top of the technology, constantly interact with your large customers, travel all the time because you have to maintain the relationships. You have to regulate the politics inside the business. Believe me, it's no picnic. And you think, well, they get a lot of money. It's like, what makes you think that's such a good thing? You know, like if you're half crazy and you have a lot of money, you're going to be crazy a lot faster, I can tell you that. Because it frees you from all sorts of constraints. You know, we know the data on lottery winners. They're no happier a year later, and some of them are done. Especially if they had like a bit of a cocaine problem to begin with. Because, you know, being broke stops you from dying if you're a cocaine addict. You get enough money and away you go. And you think to yourself, you know, you've got all sorts of bad habits and weirdnesses. If somebody dumped an infinite amount of money on you, what makes you think you wouldn't unravel completely? It's highly probable. So, anyway, so back to these women. You know, what they do when they're 30 is they look around and they hit partners, so they hit the pinnacle of their profession. They think, what the hell am I doing this for? Why would anyone in their right mind want to be woken up at 3 in the morning Sunday by their irate Japanese client who wants them to work for the next 5 hours non-stop to fix this damn problem, which is going to cost them $100 million right now? Or we'll find someone else to pay $750 an hour to fix it right now. And you think, well, that's, you know, a masculine form of value, because that's one of the criticisms. If the law firms just adopted a more feminine structure of value, it's like, what kind of bullshit is that? The reason that you get up at 3 in the morning on Sunday to talk to your Japanese client who's freaking out about their contract is because if you don't jump the hell up and do it right now, there's some starving associate who's unbelievably ambitious in New York who will pick up the pieces in 0.2 of a second, and they're smart and aggressive and they'll take you out. So it has nothing to do with masculine structures of value. It's all the foolish ideas. And you know, it's not just law where this happens. You know, we know, for example, that female doctors work far fewer hours too. So the more female doctors you have, the more doctors you have to have. And I'm not complaining about women's priorities. I'm not saying the women are wrong. Not at all. It's like the older I get, the more I understand that marriage and family are of primary importance. And the more I see women in particular, you know, they hit 35 or 40 and they're not married and they don't have kids and they are not happy. Because what the hell are you going to do from the time you're 40 till the time you're 80? You got no family? You got no relationships? What are you going to do? Go run your company. Yeah, well, if you're 1 in 1,000, that'll satisfy you. So you bloody well better make sure you're that 1 in 1,000, and you're probably not, because those people are rare. So then, because Dr. Peterson, one of the natural responses to what you said would be, okay, well, the priorities are, it's a rigged game because only women are the ones who are able to procreate. So what do we answer to that? Of course it's a rigged game. Obviously it's a rigged game. Women have complicated lives, and the pill has made them more complicated. Well, that's not, I wouldn't say that exactly because, you know, 100 years, in 1895, the average person in the Western world lived on $1 a day in today's money. Okay, so those people worked so hard and slaved away to such a degree that you can't even imagine it, and all their kids died, right? So the death rate among kids below 5 was beyond comprehension, and so like women had a terrible time of it, and well, so did men. They got to be coal miners and soldiers, because that wasn't exactly entertaining, you know. So life was very, 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 very hard before we got rich, and we're rich. Even those of you who are in this class who think you're poor, it's like, oh, no, you're not. You're in the top 1/10 of 1% by historical standards, and probably there by current world standards as well. Of course, you could just compare yourself to the few people who are richer than you and feel sorry for yourself. But that's pretty pathetic in my estimation. So it's certainly historically uninformed. So yeah, women have it rough, obviously. Now, there's other things to consider. You do live 8 years longer. So that's not trivial. Testosterone kills men. That's basically why men die earlier. You know, and men are much more likely to be killed in dangerous jobs. They do almost all the dangerous jobs. They do almost all the outside work. And there's lots of reasons that men get paid more than women that have nothing to do with prejudice. It's because they take awful, horrible jobs, like working in the oil rigs in northern Alberta when it's bloody 40 below, and come out of that after 5 years with 2 or 3 fingers missing and all warped up, because you really want to wrestle pipe when it's 40 below and it's filthy with a bunch of ornery men who are hungover beyond belief. It's like, that's not very entertaining. So yeah, I mean, each gender, each sex has its own unfairness to deal with, but to think of that as a consequence of the social structure, it's like, come on, really? What about nature itself? And this is something that seems to be completely invisible on the left side of the political spectrum. It's like, of course you're bloody oppressed and your life is full of suffering, obviously. But to think about that as a direct consequence of unjust social structures is just moronic. It's like, that's part of the reason, a small part, but look where you're sitting, people. It's pretty warm in here. And you're so privileged you can come here on Saturday morning and listen to an intellectual lecture. It's like, you should be happy about that, because by historical standards, you should be out lifting rocks in your skeletal form, about 5'3" with no teeth. So
fighting with cougars.
Yeah, cougars and lions. Yeah, exactly. So, there's no gratitude. That's the thing. There's no gratitude for what our society is capable of doing. So,
Serene?